Number 9. Caitlin O'Brien and Shay Sturt. 31-year-old Caitlin O'Brien was well aware that her decade-long relationship with Shay Sturt was toxic, but the young Australian woman's repeated attempts to escape him were unsuccessful. As much as she wanted to get away from the violence Sturt subjected her to, she couldn't seem to fully let go. It was reportedly common for O'Brien, who worked as a nurse, to show up at her job in Melbourne crying and with visible injuries from the couple's latest fight. And by the time things took a deadly turn, the courtroom had become a familiar place for her and Sturt. During one incident back in 2010, she suggested that Sturt might need mental help for his temper, and he responded by punching her in the head several times. On another occasion, Sturt struck O'Brien during a disagreement about furniture. Over the years, O'Brien sought medical help at least 30 times for injuries allegedly caused by her partner, and the police were called often enough to most likely be on a first-name basis with the couple. But there were limits to what the justice system could do to separate the pair, especially since O'Brien often withdrew her complaint or dropped charges against her boyfriend. In other instances, Sturt suffered only minor consequences for his behavior. Meanwhile, his psychological state went from paranoid and hostile to dangerously delusional, and his worsening mental issues went untreated. O'Brien finally made the decision to leave for good when Sturt had a violent psychotic episode that caused her to fear for her life. While he was detained in the mental ward, she contacted an ex and asked if she could stay with him, and she stressed that it was an emergency. But he didn't pick up on the urgency of the matter and instead told O'Brien to wait a few days to be sure of her decision. It was during that window of time that Sturt was released from the hospital. He went straight to O'Brien's apartment, and a brutal struggle ensued. Caitlin did her best to try fighting Sturt off, but he overpowered her and stabbed her multiple times with a pair of scissors before smothering her to death with a pillow. Less than 36 hours earlier, Sturt had promised never to hurt his girlfriend. And while O'Brien wanted to believe he had the best of intentions, there were signs that something dangerous would inevitably happen if she didn't get away from him. Even if Caitlin didn't notice the red flags firsthand, other people saw the writing on the wall. Unfortunately, by the time authorities locked Sturt up for any meaningful length of time, Caitlin was dead. The only reassuring takeaway from this senseless tragedy is the fact that he'll spend at least 22 years behind bars before he sees freedom again. Number 8. Hamburg church shooting. In early 2023, officials from Germany's Weapons Control Authority received an anonymous letter from a concerned civilian. The civilian suspected a 35-year-old former Jehovah's Witness from Hamburg named Philip Fuzz of being mentally unstable. According to the letter, Fuzz seemed angry with fellow members of his church, and they were worried that he would take drastic action against them. More specifically, the note warned that Fuzz might be suffering from an undiagnosed mental illness and that he harbored anger specifically against the Jehovah's Witnesses and his former employer. Authorities visited Fuzz but found no reason to take away his gun, the same gun he used to commit a horrific shooting during a service at a local Jehovah's Witness Kingdom Hall 2 months later. Police rushed to the scene, but by the time they got there, 4 men and 2 women between the ages of 33 and 60 were dead. 8 others were injured, including 4 victims who sustained serious injuries. Fuzz, who had reportedly left the church 18 months earlier, then turned the gun on himself before members of the local Special Forces team could apprehend him. Although Fuzz left the church voluntarily, his departure apparently did not occur on good terms. But people are more concerned over why his gun wasn't taken away, rather than his falling out with the congregation. Fuzz was reportedly cooperative during the visit to his house 2 months before the shooting, and the authorities left after issuing a verbal warning to him for not keeping a bullet locked up in his safe. During a press conference, Police Chief Ralph Martin Meyer said that Fuzz had no criminal record and that law enforcement had no legal grounds to revoke his gun. At the scene, investigators uncovered a backpack full of ammunition. A search of the gunman's apartment turned up 15 loaded magazines, with 15 cartridges each and 4 boxes of ammunition containing 200 cartridges. While many believe the deadly shooting could have and should have been prevented, Meyer credited the quick police response for preventing even more lives from being lost. Number 7. South Korea crowd crush. After enduring more than 2 years of life in lockdown and other COVID-19 related restrictions that prevented large crowds from gathering in Korea, an estimated 100,000 people went out in downtown Seoul to celebrate Halloween in 2022. It was the first post-pandemic Halloween party in the country's capital, and after being cooped up at home for so long, people were ready to let loose. Early on in the evening, police began receiving calls from concerned partygoers who noticed that the crowd was becoming dangerously congested. Fearing a deadly stampede or a crowd crush, callers urged law enforcement to report to the scene and help get things under control. But nobody came, and the conditions only became more cramped as more and more people shoved their way into a narrow alley. Hours after the first emergency call was placed, the exact thing the emergency callers were trying to prevent from happening occurred. A massive crowd crush, which resulted in the deaths of at least 156 people. Another 172 people were hurt, including at least 33 partygoers who suffered from serious injuries. Afterward, authorities claimed that they didn't receive their first call for help until after 10 o'clock p.m., around the time of the crush. But records showed that they received calls as early as 6:34 p.m., nearly 4 hours earlier. In the tragedy's aftermath, Korean Prime Minister Han Duck-soo called for an investigation into law enforcement's failure to act sooner, which would have undoubtedly saved lives. Number 6. Casey Brittle and Sanchez Williams. 21-year-old Casey Brittle was beaten to death in 2011 after suffering for years at the hands of her daughter's father, 27-year-old Sanchez Williams. The couple's child witnessed the brutality firsthand, and Williams allegedly sat and did nothing for 2 hours while the young mother laid unconscious at their home in Nottinghamshire, England. Sadly, there were at least 11 missed opportunities over a 2-year period for authorities to take action against Williams, which would have arguably spared Casey Brittle's life. In addition to the couple's well-known history of domestic incidents, Williams had a lengthy rap sheet that demonstrated his capacity to be violent. Following Brittle's murder, authorities accused the police of failing to take even the most basic measures to protect the victim. This failure was partially blamed on Brittle's tendency to downplay her boyfriend's abuse, something she reportedly did because she feared he would inflict even worse harm against her if she told law enforcement the full truth. Some might say that it was easy to pick up on this fear based on Brittle's reluctance to press charges against Williams. Yet police failed to question why the young woman called them repeatedly and then hesitated, according to an incident report. After being found guilty of Brittle's murder and sentenced to life in prison with a minimum of 15 years, it'll be a long time before Williams can harm another woman. But many believe that Brittle's death could have been prevented if law enforcement had simply picked up on the obvious signs that she desperately needed their protection. Number 5. The murder of Rasheem Carter. A 25-year-old African-American father named Rasheem Carter was last seen at a motel in Laurel, Mississippi in October of 2022. Just a day earlier, he had gone to the Taylorsville Police Department and reported that several men were after him. He also told his mom, Tiffany, that 3 trucks with white men were chasing him and yelling racial slurs, and he made it clear that he believed his life was in danger. Tiffany later said that Carter had fled from his workplace after a disagreement with a co-worker. When Carter failed to materialize, his concerned loved ones reported him missing. About a month after his disappearance, his severed head was found in a remote wooded area. The rest of his remains were found elsewhere. Someone obviously did something terrible and evil to Rasheem, and his family wants justice, but they feel like law enforcement has failed to take meaningful action. The Smith County Sheriff's Office has said that there's no reason to suspect foul play in Carter's death, and reportedly told the family that wild animals may have torn Carter's body apart. Tiffany and Rasheem's other loved ones are now calling for a federal investigation into what appears to them to be a needless tragedy. The family is represented by prominent attorney Ben Crump, who said during a press conference in early 2023 that the Carters believe law enforcement is trying to sweep Rasheem's murder under the rug. They also believe he was the victim of a hate crime based on the things he told them shortly before his death. Crump implored the U.S. Department of Justice to take action where state and local authorities are failing to do so, and to investigate the disturbing incident which he described as a Mississippi lynching as a civil rights case. Laurel Police Chief Tommy Cox told NBC News that his department took the initial missing persons report about Carter, but denied that Rasheem had gone to the agency seeking help. Cox also said that the department handed the case over to the Smith County Sheriff's Office shortly after the report was filed because it was outside their jurisdiction, but that he believed his officers tried to do the right thing and looked into the case to the extent that they could. In addition to what seems to many like a lack of concern on behalf of the Smith County Sheriff's Office over Carter's death, there are lingering unanswered questions, including why authorities chose to search the area where they found his remains. The cause of his death also remains unclear. According to Tiffany Carter, her son was coherent and did not seem to be under the influence of drugs or alcohol during their last conversations. The Mississippi Bureau of Investigation has joined the probe but declined to comment, citing the ongoing nature of the case. In the meantime, Rasheem's family, friends, and young daughter are left to carry on without him. They are left without knowing exactly what happened to him, and if anyone who might have been involved will ever face justice. Number 4. Senseless gym shooting of military veteran. A 34-year-old United States Marine named Harrison Bordenave was working out at a gym in Opelousas, Louisiana in early 2023 when a man later identified as 34-year-old Jason Leday approached him. The two men exchanged some words, and for reasons that aren't particularly clear, Leday allegedly told Bordenave, "You don't need all that cardio because cardio is not going to help you outrun a bullet." Bordenave's cousin Ron Haley later told local station KLFY that Leday approached Bordenave again just a few weeks later and hurled racial slurs at him. Haley said that his cousin filed a police report over the incident, but that law enforcement didn't take the complaint seriously. He even claimed that one officer looked at Bordenave's U.S. Marines tattoo and made a comment alluding to him having post-traumatic stress disorder and overreacting. Feeling as though the police responded inadequately to the report, Bordenave's mother, Charlotte, tried to take surveillance footage of her son's interactions with Leday to the police station. Less than 24 hours later, someone approached Bordenave at the gym and shot him in the chest at point-blank range. He died from his injuries. Police arrested Leday on suspicion of murder, something that Bordenave's loved ones believe could have been prevented if law enforcement had taken more action upon receiving his initial complaint. Charlotte Bordenave also thinks that the authorities should have looked into Leday's extensive criminal history, which she believes reflects his capacity to be violent. Speaking with KLFY, she said, "Shame on you. Do better. Do better by the citizens you're sworn to protect and serve. It should not come to this. It should not come to the death of a person for your job to be done. The investigation is ongoing." Number 3. A woman's worst nightmare. In early 2023, roughly 30 years after enduring a horrifying, life-changing experience that she believes she never saw justice for, a 43-year-old Australian woman named Karen Isles came forward publicly to tell her story. At the time of the incident back in 1993, she and a friend had travelled from New South Wales to Queensland's Gold Coast for a family beach vacation. While they were there, a group of 15 men nearly twice their age began talking to Karen and invited her to come have lunch where they were staying. In hindsight, she realized they were grooming her, but as a naive teenager, she didn't know any better. Once she got there, one of the men pushed her into a room and assaulted her, while the rest of the group looked on and eventually joined in. During an interview with news.com.au 3 decades later, Karen described their behavior as very orchestrated and methodical. In other words, the crime seemed clearly planned out. When the horrific attack was finally over, the young woman ran back to her family and best friend and continued the day as planned, doing her best to act like nothing was wrong. She didn't tell her family what happened, but they noticed a dramatic change in her behavior. After years of suspecting that something was deeply wrong, her concerned loved ones read her diary and learned about the assault. They encouraged Karen to press charges, but she still blamed herself and wasn't ready to go to the police. Finally, during an International Women's Day march in 2004, she realized that the assault wasn't her fault. She went to the Newtown police with her diary and described in detail what had happened, right down to the exact date, time, and place the incident occurred. Karen also provided the names of another victim and a witness. Law enforcement reassured her that they would launch a multi-agency investigation into the case, but the probe quickly ground to a halt. Nearly 2 decades later, she is still trying to figure out why the case was closed just 1 week after she made the report, and why her statement was fed to a paper shredder in 2018. Over the last 19 years, she says she has tried desperately, and to no avail, to persuade the police to take action. Karen said that her interactions with authorities have only added to the trauma of the assault that she suffered from to begin with. She's now campaigning for new laws in Australia that would require officers to thoroughly investigate these types of assaults and would hold them accountable if they fail to follow through on this duty. Number 2. The arrest of Karen Garner. When employees saw an elderly woman leave a Walmart store in Loveland, Colorado, with unpaid merchandise one day in 2020, they confronted her in the parking lot. The woman, later identified as 73-year-old Karen Garner, was carrying $14 worth of items, including a t-shirt, candy, and soda. She allegedly offered to pay for the goods, but the workers wouldn't let her. Instead, they took the items back and called the police. In the meantime, Karen walked away from the scene. Staff members and local authorities didn't know that she suffers from dementia and sensory aphasia, which sometimes affects her ability to understand language comprehension. While responding to the call, Officer Austin Hopp found Karen picking wildflowers on the side of the road. In a video of the encounter, Hopp could be heard telling the senior citizen to stop as he approached her on foot. Karen glanced back at him with a seemingly confused expression on her face, then continued walking with her freshly picked batch of flowers. Hopp almost immediately grabbed Karen's arms from behind, then took the 80-pound, 36-kilogram septuagenarian to the ground and handcuffed her. The terror in her voice was evident as she insisted to the officer that she was on her way home and didn't do anything wrong. With help from fellow officer Daria Jalali, who could have tried to intervene on what many would later describe as a clear display of excessive force, Hopp hogtied Karen and forced her into a squad car. When a bystander questioned the cops' aggressive behavior, Hopp told the person to go away and that it was none of their business. A police station surveillance camera later captured Hopp, Jalali, and a third officer, Tyler Blackett, laughing and fist-bumping each other while reviewing bodycam footage of the arrest. Hopp could be heard describing Garner as senile and admitting that he dislocated her shoulder and failed to administer her Miranda rights. All 3 officers resigned when the case fell under public scrutiny. Hopp was sentenced to 5 years in prison for assault after taking a plea deal, and Jalali received a 45-day jail sentence for misconduct and for failing to intervene on or report Hopp's use of excessive force. Garner was left with lasting physical damage, including limited use of her left arm. Her family sued the city and the officers involved on her behalf for using excessive force and failing to provide medical care, and received a $3 million settlement. But it won't solve the trauma she endured or heal her injuries. Number 1. Scott Shepard and Conrad Gagner. In July of 2022, officials in the small city of Cottage Grove, Oregon, launched an investigation into the alleged misconduct of the local police chief, Scott Shepard, and former police captain Conrad Gagner. The city's leaders declined to comment to the press on the nature of the allegations against the pair, who resigned from their positions just days after being put on administrative leave. In early 2023, the Register Guard revealed the details of several complaints that were lodged against Shepard and Gagner around the time of the investigation. Getting their hands on the material wasn't easy, but they finally obtained the information through a public records request that was granted to another local publication, The Chronicle, after they were initially denied and appealed the decision. According to the documents, Gagner was accused of using racial and homophobic slurs in the workplace and posting inappropriate and offensive content on social media, and Shepard allegedly failed to do anything about it. The findings also claimed that the pair were guilty of other misconduct and unprofessional behavior, including failing to run the local jail properly and failing to assist other local law enforcement agencies. Even after the limited details of the situation were made public, the city's manager, Richard Myers, failed to respond to a request for a comment. In the initial notices issued to Shepard and Garner about their potential termination, he wrote that their actions placed the city at risk of unneeded liability and described their behavior as extremely unacceptable. From what little information is available, it seems as though there were some serious breaches of professionalism within the agency, which is under the command of Interim Chief Jeff Groth, and it's most likely only a matter of time before journalists uncover more details about the scandal that the agency seems determined to keep quiet. Thanks for watching. Would you rather wait 2 hours for the police to show up after a home invasion only to learn that the culprits managed to get away thanks to the head start that the slow response gave them, or walking 5 miles to the nearest town with no cell phone signal after your car broke down on a remote highway in the middle of the night? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe. See you soon. Bye.